So I'm here with Lindsey and Bhavik. Do I get to call you our resident nerds, or is that that's too pejorative to a way to describe people who like to just be embedded in code all day long? I don't know.
I'm changing my LinkedIn title, Kent. Resident nerd at Bessemer Venture Partners.
Um, both of you have been spending a lot of time, many years, thinking about all things developer ecosystem, and of course, like this AI moment is a big one. For all developers, and so let's talk about it. The first question I have is what is really happening versus what is hype here? So Copilots seem to be real. The numbers on Copilots are real. Do we think adoption of Copilots is just completely universal at this point? Or are there some developers who are like, no, that's a waste of my time?
Yeah, it's fascinating. As a developer, having used these tools, it increases my productivity by well over 30%.
30%. Because you measure it with a stopwatch and you're like, it's just like the basic, the block and tackling of looking up libraries, that is much easier. What is the thing that is so magical?
It's being able to sit there and have the tool auto suggest the next 10 lines of code for me when I've spec'd out a certain method. And that's just where it starts. What's even cooler is it can jump to certain places in code and suggest how to edit the code, whether to add or delete sections. And so my role has gone, at least when I've been coding, has gone from just editing code directly to now approving code and hopefully eventually reviewing code.
Yeah. By the way, I hear people reference that 30% number often. That feels like 70% to me. Or do you just take a bunch of that productivity back and play video games online? Why isn't it 3x already? Because at some level, the logic still sits with you and you still have to track it. The hard work of development is actually not the typing.
Yeah, a lot of it is thinking about the abstractions you want to build, thinking about the structure of the code and the structure of the system that you want to build. And that's 60% of the work.
Yeah. And the Copilots are not there yet. They're not useful in the bigger abstractions of structure.
The higher, longer term reasoning, the bigger abstractions.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Lindsey, you have a spicy take on Copilots, or do you think they're real? Are they going to get better a year from now? Are the Copilots, have they improved, or do you think we're tapping out there?
Yeah, so actually on your first question too, last summer we were everybody's obsessed with, I think at the time it was vector databases that everybody was we must invest in one immediately. And we were what is something slightly orthogonal that we can go invest in? Let's go talk to CTOs and tech leaders across our portfolio and outside. And we talked to, a bunch of, we talked to fintechs, Morgan Stanley and others, and then Twilio and kind of larger enterprises that have graduated from the Bessemer portfolio. And then True, H&R Block, what are the tech leads at a variety of these types of companies thinking about? And all 12 of them said, we were asking, hey, how are you going to implement AI into your product? And they were we have no idea. If you could tell us, that'd be great. But if there's one thing we're going to call out, it's code gen. And so to your point of is every single developer going to adopt this? Our take is that it's every developer and every human with a computer and eventually a phone will be able to do this. And so no spicy take there. Maybe my spicy take on this front is that, and Bhavik may completely disagree with me on this, is that large language models will remain more powerful than a code-specific model. And at least on the current academic papers that we've seen comparing, GPT-4 against a fine-tuned model in, let's say, the financial services space or against Bloomberg GPT, I think it was, they perform better on a variety of domain-specific tasks. And insofar as the LLMs continue to provide the foundation, the baseline for where a lot of these applications are building, I'm not sure that the model layer will win specific to coding. But again, Bhavik might have a completely different take than me, and he probably does.
What do you think, Bhavik? Code-specific models versus general models for code gen?
Well, no, I mean, I think unfortunately, no hot takes here. In that
You're with Lindsey.
the GPT-4o and Claude 3 Opus are probably the best examples of these tools, these general purpose language tools getting really good at code reasoning. And I think that's because the interplay between code and language, right? Like developers want to write language, or at least write semantic indications of what they want their code to be and have that translated into code. And we're starting to see that get better as you scale up both the size of the models and the amount of both code and textual sort of natural language data.
Right. Yeah, you speak in code sometimes. So you make these parentheses with your hands, and yeah, it's like a natural, right? I mean, yeah, code is language, right? So, okay, cool. So that's Copilots. Now, there were some big waves this year, so at least from a demo standpoint with Devin and others that I think the world watched, where we have this more, you've called it the graduation motion, where the Copilots become more agentic, more autonomous. That to me, I have some suspicions that is not real yet. That is not, didn't take your 30% and make it 35%. That it's an incredibly cool demo, but actually maybe not all that practical and hard to sort of harness. What's your read on the reality versus the sort of demo hype there?
Well, maybe I'll just share. I think there's almost two schools of thought right now that we're seeing play out. The first are the Devins and SWE agents and Open Devins and MemGPTs of the world, and maybe you could add Augment to that category, or a couple others that say that, hey, like we now have the tools, we have all the requisite tools to put together and build these end-to-end automation agents that can do basic coding tasks, like solving a specific PR for an open source repository end to end. And they've shown that for SWE agent benchmarks or SWE benchmarks. And then there's another school of thought that says, hey, actually, for most coding tasks, we can't do that. And instead, we should be taking these really powerful language models and embedding them in developer workflows as they sit. Right. And I think the companies I'd look to and point to there are companies like SuperMaven or Cursor that are building these like truly deeply embedded Copilots.
More deeply embedded Copilots, effectively. Yeah.
That's right.
And so where do you fall on that school of thought? Do you think that the sort of truly agentic autonomous Copilots are likely to break through and actually be super useful soon? Or do you think we're never going to fully take our hands off the code wheel?
I think there's a lot of work going into improving the end-to-end Copilots. I think they're still bottlenecked by the capabilities of the core language models. But there's a ton of fine-tuning work, a ton of imitation learning work, there's starting to be a bunch of reinforcement learning work sort of coming out of these research institutions trying to improve the quality of these end-to-end agents. And so I think we're going to see leaps and bounds improvements in those agents over time, but we're still quite a ways away of sort of being able to automate even 50 or 60% of a developer's job, because most of it isn't writing that new code. It's thinking sort of higher level, thinking more abstractly, as we mentioned.
Right. A year from now, do you think a substantial chunk of code is beginning to be written autonomously, or do you think we're still in Copilot?
Well, I think we're in Copilot land where these agents or these embedded Copilots are helping autonomously write the code. But that's a world where developers are very much in the loop, and it's not. Right. It's not.
We're watching every chunk of code that's being written.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe Ken, I'll add onto that the implications that we've been discussing on the investment side, which are kind of threefold. One is interoperability, is like how specifically between these AI tools and existing software tools and development systems. And then that's like kind of a gauge or a criteria for how we think about the near-term viability of products and their ability to get distributed. The second is, what is the impact, whether we go down path one or path two, as Bhavik described, the impact on junior versus senior developers, right? Like if you think about the analogy of education, it's not like we won't need school in order to effectively use AI, even in the medium term. I think you'll need to understand a set of facts about a space to be an effective human in the loop, right? And so what are the set of facts that you need to understand? Are those more or less important as a junior or senior developer? I could see it going either way. Like it could just completely up level a junior developer, or it could get rid of the need for them completely. And senior developers are the ones who are doing the code review on mostly agentically produced code. And then how does this affect specialized engineering roles like DevOps engineers, QA testers, security experts, et cetera? Do you have just kind of full stack senior devs? And then the third, which I think is like kind of just I don't know, for us from a top of funnel sourcing the next audacious founder type thing, I think the average age of the founder will decrease. The average age of a venture-backed founder, the average age of a software company founder. And are we prepared to take the trade-off of what that might mean from like management and just developing as a human to motivate other people and kind of the psychology side of things? But it's highly possible that really young teams will be able to build world-changing products. And are we excited to back them? I think the answer is absolutely yes.
The productivity gains mean you won't have to manage massive teams to get these products deployed, right? Which, old people like me like to think that, we've got some wisdom, some management ability, but I'm already way too long gone to have a startup myself. But very cool. I mean, one of the things that you write about in the report this year, which is, I think, it's sort of a beautiful investment area because it's super unsexy and super boring, but I think really important is just the impact of this technology on kind of code refactoring, like the all the crazy work that we think of as sort of tech debt collectively, where companies spend a ton of time just looking at old code, refactoring it, changing it in some way, possibly in languages that, there are only 9 of us who know how to code in anymore. So talk about what we're seeing there, how real that is, and the gains there, the difference between the hype and the reality.
Yeah, there are so many unsexy parts of being a software developer.
It's not as cool as Hollywood makes it seem.
Not in the slightest. And we're talking code refactoring is huge. It's a big challenge. That these code bases have a ton of dependencies, and so tracking those dependencies as you refactor is just so painful. But it's like it's refactoring, it's infrastructure provisioning, it's quality assurance, it's IT configurations, it's security operations and pen testing. Like there's all of these sort of long tail, unsexy tasks that a developer does, or at least someone on the development team does on a day to day. Most of these general purpose copilots aren't really built for those tasks. And so we're seeing a whole bunch of really interesting startup innovation at that long tail.
Yeah.
Solving for still really, really high value use cases. And what's exciting there is it's not just automating someone's day-to-day job, but it's improving the quality of code in general. So for example, for penetration testing, like these tools aren't just automating what a pen tester would do, they're improving the security posture of the code, which is reducing risk for the organization. So the value prop for companies to adopt is even stronger than your sort of normal automation tooling.
Right. Yeah, it is interesting. It's like the writing of net new code is sort of the shiny object in the code world, but it's the pen testing. It's some of these things that sort of are the downside protection pieces that are probably attached in some ways to higher value because the stakes are a lot higher, and yet they are boring types of work and they are really hard and sort of mind numbing. And so those may be the higher value applications of this technology, at least in this first wave, which I think is really a fun way to think.
That's right.
Lindsey, anything you would add in the unsexy code space that you're intrigued by?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we love PagerDuty. They're a former Bessemer portfolio company, but engineers hate getting paged. Of course, it's like the same thing as anything unplanned or unexpected in your life, and then to know that you have to do that for some startup lean teams as frequently as once a month or once every 2 weeks. Code should be able to, or code gen agents should be able to fix many of these high level issues before a developer is asked to get online. And so we constantly just think about, from a behavioral perspective, what are really tedious, mind numbing tasks that people would pay, maybe they would give their right leg. They can't give either of their arms because they got a code, but their right leg to not have to do anymore. And that also falls in that bucket in addition to what Bhavik described with code refactoring.
That's awesome. All right. So you predict by 2030 that a majority of software will be built by people who are more akin to software reviewers. Are we going to stop teaching these people how to code? Does the entire code sort of education and approach change, or do you think we're still going to be teaching the ABCs and having people manually write code in colleges and then get to use the Copilots to fly? Like, where does that go?
Well, so I mean, I look to the calculator. When I was younger, we used the TI-84 calculator. But before we got to use that shiny new object, we had to learn the multiplication tables and we had to learn how to compute. And so I would be surprised if all of the algorithms classes, all of the intro programming classes, all of the distributed systems, like all the great, really, really interesting software classes went away and were ceded to the Copilots. But I do think that these Copilots will be used as a tool in educational environments.
Right.
And that's definitely going to change how schools teach.
Right. And a lot of that education does not focus on a lot of that unsexy work you referenced that maybe can be taken off of people's plates. So like just sort of like the infrastructure pieces, the setup, et cetera, like maybe that, all the pain that we go to with new employees in corporate environments to sort of train them on that grunt work, maybe that goes away, which is more productivity.
Yeah.
Do you think, all right, different topic. In my lifetime, am I going to be writing applications? You talk about like, we're going to make the entire global population a 10x developer. Like, am I writing code sometime soon? Or is that always going to feel like a total black box that I shouldn't be playing in at all?
Sorry, Ken, we'll change the report. It'll say every human on the planet except for Ken Bennett.
Yeah.
No, not at all. No, I think the answer is yes. Like eventually there are many things. I'm sure if you sat down for 3 minutes and thought about things in your workflow that could be automated, and that you're like, wow, I really wish I had somebody on our team write this for me. It's something you could do by yourself. And, less than maybe an hour to learn and then less than 5 minutes to actually implement. I think Ethan Malik, Professor Malik teaches at Wharton, and he has this new book, Co-Intelligence. He writes about how it's almost like unlocking a creative capability that you didn't have before feels about as close to flow state as you can get in something that you, again, like didn't take a huge chunk of your life to actually learn how to do. And I just think all of us have experienced this, where the first time we sat down with ChatGPT, we were like, wait, okay, if it can do this, like what else can it do? And I just think we're all going to experience that, even on the technical side for those of us who don't have that, educational background.
That's great. And just building off of that, like, I don't think you'll be writing code directly, but I think you'll be writing natural language. Or you'll be asking an agent to do something that gets compiled into code or gets run through a code interpreter. And I would argue that most people are already doing that. Like so many queries in ChatGPT today are run through a code interpreter with some code generation. That, from all the research that's happening at the intersection of code and language and the extent to which you can improve agentic capabilities using code, I would be hard pressed if most, if not everyone, using any sort of natural language tool down the line isn't using code generation in some fashion.
Agreed.
Very cool. All right. So anything else on your horizon a year from now? Is there anything you think we might be talking about that no one is really talking about yet? Or is that our venture capitalists much better at predicting the present than the future, which is what the data might indicate?
I think we're going to have a lot more data come out over the next year that shows how efficient people are with these copilots and with these end-to-end agents. I think we're going to have a lot more data that directly translates that efficiency into improvements in economics for these businesses.
Right.
And so something I'm tracking closely with our portfolio companies here is ARR per FTE. Just thinking about top line per head count and how that's tracking over.
Right. This 30% number is kind of an anecdotal thing, but sooner or later we should start to see the numbers actually show up in margins and efficiency of businesses.
That's right.
And maybe that's soon enough. That's great. Lindsey, any last spicy takes for a year from now or 5 years from now? Or
Yeah, I mean, so I'll add one thing to Bhavik's point, and then I'll add one thing new. The thing I'll add is, this is obvious, this is duh, but like, not only will you get data on that front, you'll also get data of AI generated code, then creating a reinforcement learning loop and creating this virtuous cycle where perhaps that line, like, I don't know where I don't know where that line ends up plateauing, right? But to Bhavik's point, like, that ARR per FT number should actually continuously increase over time if you believe that feedback makes these models better. And then the thing I'll add is, we've been thinking a lot about, the open versus closed debate, which I think our colleagues Janelle and Samir and Kent had a conversation on. And what is the impact of code-gen agents on open source projects? Does that then, do they contribute in a way where the developer is in the loop? How do you then cultivate community if agents are the ones that are contributing? Does that still beget distribution advantages? And
yeah, the
in
agents
a world
have,
where
much better cred on the open source commits. That's
yeah,
scary.
yeah, and you're like, okay, I can't host an event for them, so how do we do DevRel? And if eventually an open source project is built by an agent, like presumably with a human in the loop, at least a year from now, to your question, and we're like, you should commercialize this entity. Like, how does that work? Can somebody plug in? Can Bhavik plug in? And then we back him to like commercialize these open source projects. So I'm really excited about what this might imply, and just excited to see what the end state looks like.
Yeah, maybe dystopian. We'll find out. But well, great. Well, thanks so much for your time. We'll meet back here in a year and figure out how wrong we were.